The envelope trembled in Eleanor Morgan's hands as she stood before the imposing timber gates of the Double R Ranch. Dust clung to her worn traveling dress, the same faded blue cotton she'd been married in and widowed in 6 months prior. The Montana sun beat mercilessly on her bonnet as she clutched the letter that had brought her 2,000 miles from Philadelphia, responding to an advertisement for a mail-order bride. Her stomach twisted with hunger she'd ignored for 3 days, the last of her money spent on the stagecoach fare that deposited her at the edge of Copper Ridge at dawn. Through the slats of the fence, she could see him, Garrett Sinclair, owner of the largest cattle operation in 3 territories. He sat astride a massive bay stallion, broad-shouldered and commanding, his sun-darkened skin speaking of years under this unforgiving sky. Even from this distance, she could see the hard line of his jaw, the confidence in how he held the reins. He was pointing toward the northern pastures, giving orders to a group of ranch hands who nodded with the deference of men who respected their boss. This was the man whose advertisement had promised a partnership built on mutual respect and honest work. Words that had seemed like salvation when she'd read them in the boarding house, her landlady threatening eviction. Before Eleanor could gather the courage to call out, Garrett's eyes found hers. He said something to his men, then urged his horse toward the gate. As he drew closer, she could see his features clearly. Sharp cheekbones, a straight nose that had been broken at least once, and eyes the color of storm clouds that assessed her with unsettling intensity. A thin scar ran from his left temple into his hairline, disappearing into dark hair that needed cutting. He was perhaps 33, though the harsh lines around his eyes aged him. "You'd be Miss Morgan," he said, his voice a deep rumble that carried authority without needing volume. It wasn't a question. He swung down from the saddle with practiced ease, standing a full head taller than her 5 feet 4 inches. "You're late. Letter said you'd arrive yesterday." "The stage broke an axle near Helena," Eleanor replied, lifting her chin despite her exhaustion. "I walked the last 8 miles. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps, or calculation. His gaze swept over her, taking in her worn boots, the fraying hem of her dress, the carpet bag that held everything she owned. When his eyes returned to hers, they'd softened fractionally. "You walked 8 miles in this heat?" "I had little choice, Mr. Sinclair." She pulled his letter from her pocket, the paper creased from countless readings. "Your advertisement specified someone willing to work hard. I assumed that included getting here." The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. Then he glanced at the letter in her hand, and his expression shuddered. "Let me see your letter of response, the one you sent me." Eleanor's heart sank. She'd written that letter in desperation, composing it by candlelight after 12-hour days in the textile factory, her fingers aching from the looms. She'd tried to sound educated, capable, worthy, but her spelling had never been strong, and she'd had no one to check her work. With shaking hands, she withdrew the copy she'd kept, already knowing what he'd see. Garrett took it, his eyes scanning the lines. His jaw tightened. Then, to her horror, he laughed, a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. "You wrote that you can cook and clean and sew housework good. And here," he pointed to a line, "I will be a good wife and help with the animals." He looked up at her, and the proud ranch owner laughed at the mail-order bride's simplicity, shaking his head. "Animals. You couldn't even spell animals correctly." Heat flooded Eleanor's face, shame burning through her exhaustion. "I had 3 years of schooling, Mr. Sinclair." My father needed me in the factory after that. But I can read well enough, and what I lack in spelling, I make up for in honesty and effort. Honesty? He folded the letter with sharp, angry movements. You presented yourself as educated, as someone who could help run a ranch that does business with buyers from San Francisco to Chicago. I need someone who can keep ledgers, write correspondence, represent this operation with dignity. His voice had gone cold. Not someone who writes like a child. The words struck like physical blows. Eleanor had endured her father's fists, her late husband's cruelty, the condescension of factory owners who worked women to exhaustion for pennies. But this felt different. This felt like her last hope crumbling. Then I've wasted your time, and my own. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. She bent to pick up her carpet bag, though she had no idea where she'd go. The $8 she'd sewn into her hem wouldn't get her back to Philadelphia. Wouldn't even cover a week's lodging. Behind her closed eyelids, she saw the flash of her second husband's fist, remembered the crack of her rib breaking. She'd fled that marriage, only to bury him 3 weeks later when his horse threw him. The life insurance had barely covered his debts. I want to ask you to take a moment to subscribe to our channel and give this video a like. It's really important to us and motivates us to bring you more quality content like this. Thank you so much for your support. Wait. Garrett's voice stopped her as she turned toward the road. When she looked back, his expression had shifted, the mockery gone, replaced by something harder to read. He stepped closer, near enough that she could smell leather and sage and honest sweat. You walked 8 miles in heat that's killed men. You're standing here with your chin up even after I humiliated you. That takes backbone. He paused. Why do you really need this arrangement, Miss Morgan? Eleanor met his storm-gray eyes. Because the alternative is worse than anything you could say to me. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant lowing of cattle and the creak of the windmill by the barn. Garrett studied her with an intensity that made her want to look away, but she held his gaze. Can you actually cook? He finally asked. Yes, plain food but plenty of it. Clean? I kept a 4-room apartment spotless while working 10 hours a day at the mill. The animals? Can you learn to tend them? I learn fast, Mr. Sinclair. What I don't know, I'll figure out. Another long pause. Then Garrett walked to his saddlebag and withdrew a leather-bound book and a pencil. He flipped it open and handed it to her. Write your name. Eleanor's hand shook as she took the pencil. She formed the letters carefully. Eleanormorgan. Her handwriting was cramped but legible. Garrett examined it, then wrote something below. Copy this. The ranch needs 50 head of cattle by Thursday. She bent over the paper, tongue between her teeth in concentration. She got ranch and cattle and Thursday correct. She hesitated over needs. Was it 1 E or 2? And guessed wrong. When she finished, Garrett took the book back. He stared at her writing for a long moment, then at her face. Something in his expression cracked. My mother couldn't read or write at all, he said quietly. She was a Shoshone woman who married an Irish rancher. She knew the land, the animals, the weather, could predict a storm 3 days out just by watching how the horses behaved. She kept this ranch running during the hardest years. He closed the book. Book learning isn't everything. Eleanor's throat tightened. I'm sorry about your mother. She died 5 years ago. Winter fever. He turned back to his horse, running a hand along its neck, as if needing the contact. My wife died 2 years later, childbirth, the baby with her. His voice had gone flat, drained of emotion. I swore I'd never marry again, never put myself through that. This arrangement was supposed to be practical, a business partnership. Nothing more. I understand business partnerships, Mr. Sinclair. My second husband married me for my factory wages and spent them on whiskey. When I threatened to leave, she stopped, old fear tightening her chest. Let's just say I learned that survival requires clear terms. Garrett turned to face her fully. In the harsh sunlight, she could see more scars. One across his knuckles, another at his collarbone, visible where his shirt fell open. These were marks of a hard life, honestly lived. Clear terms. All right. He crossed his arms over his broad chest. You'll have your own room in the main house. You'll cook, clean, and I'll teach you the ranch work. You'll learn to ride, tend animals, mend fence. In 6 months, we'll see if this arrangement suits us both. If it does, we'll marry legally. If it doesn't, I'll pay your passage to wherever you want to go and give you $200 to start over. And if you decide before 6 months that I'm unsuitable, same terms. I'm not in the business of trapping people, Miss Morgan. She studied his weathered face, looking for deception and finding only tired honesty. What do you expect from a wife, Mr. Sinclair? I need to know what I'm agreeing to. A partner, someone who pulls their weight, someone who doesn't lie. He held her gaze. And eventually, companionship. Not love, I don't have that in me anymore. But respect. Friendship, maybe. Honesty. He paused. And yes, eventually, physical intimacy. I'm not looking for a housekeeper, Miss Morgan. I'm looking for a wife. But that part comes when, if we both want it. I won't force anything. Eleanor's mouth had gone dry. Her second husband had forced plenty, had taken what he wanted with brutal efficiency. The thought of intimacy made her stomach clench. But she heard something in Garrett's voice, saw something in his storm cloud eyes that spoke of a different kind of man. I can't promise to love you either, Mr. Sinclair, she said softly. I don't think I have that in me anymore. But I can promise honesty, hard work, and loyalty. If you treat me with respect, I'll give you the same. Then we have an agreement. He extended his hand. Eleanor shook it, his palm calloused and warm against hers. His grip was firm but not crushing, and he released her hand the moment she began to pull away. It was the handshake of equals, and something in her chest loosened fractionally. Come on, Garrett said, collecting her carpet bag before she could protest. I'll show you the house. Maria, she's the foreman's wife, has been keeping it livable, but it needs a woman's touch. You look like you could use a meal and a bath. As they walked through the gates, Eleanor took in her first real look at the Double R Ranch. The main house was a sprawling structure of rough-hewn logs and river stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around 2 sides. Beyond it stood a massive barn, several smaller outbuildings, and corrals holding horses that gleamed in the afternoon sun. In the distance, cattle dotted the rolling grassland, and the mountains rose purple against the impossibly blue sky. It's beautiful, she whispered. Garrett glanced at her, surprise flickering across his features. It's harsh land. Takes everything you've got. So did Philadelphia. At least here, the view makes up for it. He almost smiled. You might feel differently when winter comes. We get snowed in for weeks sometimes. I'll learn to endure it. Yeah, Garrett said, studying her with those penetrating gray eyes. I think you might. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of exhausting work and constant learning. Eleanor woke before dawn to cook breakfast for Garrett and the ranch hands. Usually biscuits, bacon, and strong coffee that could strip paint. Her first attempts at biscuits had been disasters, hard as river stones, but Maria had shown her the trick of working the dough lightly, and by the second week, the men were cleaning their plates. After breakfast, Garrett took her out to the barn. "Can't live on a ranch if you can't ride," he'd said that first morning, leading out a dappled mare with gentle eyes. "This is Willow. She's patient with beginners." Eleanor had stared up at the horse, her heart pounding. "I've never even touched a horse before." "Then it's time you learned." Garrett had shown her how to approach, how to let Willow smell her hand, how to stroke her neck with confidence. Animals sense fear. Don't be afraid of her. She's got a good heart. Learning to ride was humbling and painful. Eleanor fell twice in the first week, once landing so hard she couldn't breathe for a terrifying moment. Garrett had pulled her to her feet with gentle hands, checking her ribs with impersonal efficiency. "You're not property. You're a person," he'd said when she tried to apologize for her clumsiness. "People fall. They get back up. That's how learning works." By the third week, she could mount without help and ride at a trot without bouncing like a sack of grain. The triumph she felt, cantering across the south pasture, wind in her face and Willow's powerful muscles moving beneath her, was unlike anything she'd experienced. For the first time in years, she felt capable, strong. Garrett was a demanding teacher, but a patient one. He showed her how to mend fence, how to check cattle for injury or illness, how to read the sky for coming weather. He taught her to shoot, standing behind her to adjust her grip on the rifle, his breath warm against her ear as he murmured instructions. "Breathe out slow and squeeze the trigger. Don't pull, squeeze." The closeness unsettled her. She'd flinch sometimes when he moved too quickly, old instincts kicking in. He noticed. After the second time, he'd stepped back and said quietly, "I'll die before I hurt you, Eleanor. But you need to tell me what you need. I can't read minds." She'd turned to face him, the rifle still in her hands. "Space. I need space sometimes. And slow movements." She couldn't finish. Garrett's jaw had gone tight. "Understood. You tell me if I crowd you." That conversation had shifted something between them. The wariness in her chest eased, fractionally. She found herself watching him when he didn't know she was looking. The way he moved with unconscious grace despite his size, the surprising gentleness with which he handled injured animals, the easy authority he had with his men that came from respect rather than fear. She learned other things too. Garrett woke with nightmares sometimes. She could hear him through the wall that separated their rooms, gasping awake in the darkness. He never spoke of them. He carried a small photograph in his pocket, creased from handling. His late wife, Eleanor assumed, though she never asked. He took his coffee black and drank too much of it. He had a habit of rubbing the scar at his temple when he was thinking. And despite his gruff exterior, she'd seen him sit for an hour in the barn with a sick calf, stroking its head and murmuring reassurance until the animal rallied. One evening in the fourth week, Eleanor was washing dishes when Garrett came in from the barn, his shirt torn and blood seeping from a gash on his forearm. "What happened?" She was at his side instantly, guiding him to a chair. "Ornery steer caught me with his horn." Garrett grimaced. "It's nothing." "It's not nothing. Sit still. Eleanor fetched the medical kit Maria had shown her, along with clean water and cloth. As she cleaned the wound, Garrett watched her face with an intensity that made her hands tremble. "You're good at this," he said quietly. "I had practice. My first husband worked in the factory. Machinery accidents were common." She focused on threading the needle she'd sterilized over the lamp flame. "This will hurt. I need to stitch it." "I know. Do what you need to do." Eleanor worked carefully, her tongue between her teeth in concentration. Garrett didn't flinch, though she felt the tension in his arm. When she finished and tied off the thread, she wrapped the wound in clean linen. "Thank you," Garrett said. His hand came up, hesitated, then gently touched her cheek. "You're shaking." "I don't like seeing people hurt." Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Neither do I." His thumb brushed her cheekbone, then dropped away. "You should rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. We're moving the herd to the summer pasture." That night, Eleanor lay in her narrow bed, listening to the crickets and the distant howl of coyotes. Her cheek still tingled where Garrett had touched her. It had been such a simple gesture, but it made her chest ache with something she couldn't name. She thought about the way he'd looked at her while she stitched his arm, like she mattered, like she was more than just a convenience or a burden. The next morning dawned clear and hot. The cattle drive took 2 days, with Eleanor learning to ride drag, the dustiest, hardest position at the back of the herd. By the time they reached the summer pasture, she was coated in dirt, exhausted, and exhilarated. They camped that night under stars so thick they looked like spilled salt. Garrett made coffee over the fire, while Eleanor heated beans and biscuits. The ranch hands had their own fire 50 yards away, giving them privacy. As they ate, the silence between them felt companionable rather than awkward. "You did well today," Garrett said, staring into the flames. "Better than some men I've hired. I'm too tired to feel proud, but ask me tomorrow." Eleanor wrapped her hands around her tin coffee cup, savoring the warmth. "Your hands are blistered." Garrett reached across the space between them and gently took her right hand, turning it palm up. The firelight cast shadows across his face, making him look both harder and somehow more vulnerable. "You should have said something." "Everyone has blisters on a drive. I saw yours." "I'm used to it. You're not." He reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a tin of salve. "Give me your hands." Eleanor hesitated, then extended both hands. Garrett worked the salve into her palms with careful fingers, his touch feather-light over the worst blisters. The intimacy of the moment made her breath catch. When he looked up, their eyes met and held. "Eleanor," he said, her name rough in his throat. "I need to tell you something." Her heart hammered. "What?" "I've been thinking about the 6-month arrangement, about what happens after." He didn't release her hands. "I know we agreed this was practical, business, but these past weeks?" He stopped, jaw working. "You've become more than an employee, more than a convenience. I find myself looking for you, listening for your voice, missing you when you're just in the other room." Eleanor's world tilted. "Garrett, I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I know you need time. I know you've been hurt. I just needed you to know that when I look at you, I don't see a mail-order bride or a housekeeper. I see a woman worth saving, worth knowing, worth—" He stopped, released her hands, looked away. "Never mind. Forget I said anything." But Eleanor couldn't forget. That night, wrapped in her bedroll with Garrett sleeping 10 feet away, she replayed his words. A woman worth saving. Nobody had ever looked at her and seen something worthy. She'd been a burden to her father, an income source to her first husband, a punching bag to her second. But Garrett saw something different. The realization terrified her. They returned to the ranch the next afternoon to find a stranger waiting on the porch, a well-dressed man with oiled hair and a calculated smile that made Eleanor's skin crawl. "Garrett Sinclair," the man said, standing. "I'm Vernon Walsh, representing the Continental Land Company. We've been trying to reach you for weeks." Garrett's expression went flat. "I got your letters. Burned them." Walsh's smile never wavered. "Then you know we're prepared to make you a very generous offer for the Double R. 5 times what this land is worth. You could retire, Mr. Sinclair, live comfortably in San Francisco or Denver." His hand moving to the pistol at his hip with frightening speed. "Get off my land." Walsh raised his hands, still smiling. "Just a friendly warning, Mr. Sinclair. Think about our offer." His eyes slid to Eleanor. "And consider what you're putting at risk by refusing." After Walsh rode away, Garrett stood on the porch, hands clenched on the railing. Eleanor approached cautiously. What was that about? Continental wants this entire valley for silver mining. They don't care that it'll poison the water, destroy the grazing land. His voice was tight with anger. They've been buying up ranches for a year. The ones who won't sell tend to have bad luck. Mysterious fires, cattle theft, worse. "What will you do?" Garrett turned to look at her, and the intensity in his gray eyes made her breath catch. "I'll fight. This land is all I have left of my parents, my wife, my son. I won't give it up without a fight." He paused, but Walsh was right about one thing. It's dangerous now. "If you want to leave, I'll pay your passage today. No hard feelings." Eleanor thought about the offer. She could take the money, start over somewhere safe. She'd only been here a month. She owed Garrett nothing beyond the work she'd already done. But when she opened her mouth, different words came out. "I'm not leaving." "Eleanor, you gave me a chance when you didn't have to. You've treated me with more respect than anyone in my life. If you're fighting, then I'm fighting with you. Together." Something blazed in Garrett's eyes. Relief, gratitude, something deeper. "Together," he repeated, and it sounded like a promise. The trouble started 3 days later. Eleanor woke to shouting and the smell of smoke. She ran to her window and saw flames licking at the eastern barn, the one that held their winter hay stores. She was outside in her nightgown and bare feet before she'd made a conscious decision, running toward the barn. Garrett and the ranch hands were already there, forming a bucket line from the water tank. Eleanor joined them, passing buckets until her arms burned and her lungs ached from smoke. They saved the barn, but not the hay. As dawn broke gray and grim, Garrett surveyed the damage with a face like stone. Arson. Someone poured kerosene along the foundation. "Continental?" Eleanor asked, though she already knew. "Who else?" Garrett turned away, fists clenched. "Without that hay, we can't feed the herd through winter. I'll have to sell half the cattle at a loss just to buy feed." Eleanor's mind raced. What if we don't sell? What if we cut grass from the high meadow, the one you said nobody uses because it's too dangerous to reach? That meadow is a 3-day ride into the mountains, and the trail is barely passable. We'd need wagons. Then we take wagons. We take everyone who can swing a scythe, and we cut grass until we have enough. Eleanor grabbed his arm. "Garrett, I've worked in factories that should have killed me. I've survived things that would break most people. Don't let Walsh win because it's too hard." Garrett stared at her, and slowly his expression shifted. "You're serious." "Completely." He looked at his foreman, who shrugged. "The lady's got spine, boss. If she's willing to try, so am I." That's how Eleanor found herself 3 days later in a high mountain meadow, swinging a scythe in rhythm with 10 men. The work was brutal. Her back screamed, her hands bled through her gloves, and the altitude made her dizzy. But they cut grass from dawn to dusk, loading it onto wagons that groaned under the weight. On the 4th night, as Eleanor collapsed beside the campfire too exhausted to eat, Garrett sat beside her. Without a word, he began massaging her shoulders. She stiffened, then forced herself to relax. His hands were strong, but careful, working the knots from her muscles. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For this. For teaching me that I'm stronger than I thought." Garrett's hands stilled. Then he leaned down and pressed his lips to the top of her head, a gesture so tender it made her throat tighten. "You were always strong, Eleanor. You just needed someone to see it." They returned to the ranch a week later with enough hay to see the herd through winter. But their triumph was short-lived. That night, Eleanor woke to the sound of breaking glass. She grabbed the rifle Garrett had taught her to use and crept into the hallway. The front door hung open. Moonlight streamed across broken furniture and scattered papers. Eleanor's heart hammered as she moved toward Garrett's office. She found him on the floor, blood pooling from a gash on his head. 2 men stood over him, one holding a crowbar. "Well, look at this," the man with the crowbar said, grinning. "The mail-order bride. Walsh said to make sure Sinclair got the message. But maybe we should have some fun first." Eleanor didn't think. She raised the rifle and fired, the shot deafening in the enclosed space. The bullet hit the floorboards inches from the man's boot. "The next one goes in your chest," she said, her voice deadly calm despite her shaking hands. "Get out." The men looked at each other. The one with the crowbar took a step toward her. Eleanor chambered another round, the sound sharp in the silence. "I've got 4 more bullets. You feeling lucky?" They ran. Eleanor dropped to her knees beside Garrett, pressing her nightgown to the wound on his head. "Garrett, can you hear me?" He groaned, eyes fluttering open. "Eleanor? I'm here. Just stay still." She grabbed a cushion from the overturned chair and wadded it under his head. "I need to get Maria." "No." His hand caught hers. "Don't leave." "You're hurt." "Go slow. It hurts," he said, his voice rough with pain. "But I need you here, just you." So Eleanor stayed, holding pressure on the wound until the bleeding slowed. She cleaned it with whiskey that made Garrett curse, then stitched it with shaking hands. By the time she finished, tears were streaming down her face. "Hey," Garrett said softly, reaching up to cup her cheek. "I'm all right. You could have been killed." The tears came harder. "They were going to kill you, Garrett. And her voice broke. "I can't lose you. I can't. I know I'm not supposed to care. I know this is supposed to be practical. But I care. God help me. I care so much. Eleanor." Garrett pulled her down to him, wrapping his arms around her, despite the pain it must have caused. "I care too. So damn much, it scares me." They held each other in the wreckage of his office as dawn broke outside. Eleanor felt something crack open in her chest. The walls she'd built, the armor she'd worn, the conviction that she had to face everything alone. "Together," she whispered against his chest. "Together," Garrett agreed, his hands stroking her hair. The sheriff came at noon, documented the break-in, and promised to investigate. But everyone knew Continental had too much money and influence. They also knew that the next attack would be worse. "You need to sell," Maria told Garrett as Eleanor bandaged his head wound again. "Vernon Walsh won't stop until you're dead. Let him try." Garrett's jaw was set in a stubborn line Eleanor had come to recognize. He will try. And next time, Eleanor might not be quick enough with that rifle. The words hung in the air like a threat. That night, Garrett knocked on Eleanor's door. When she opened it, he stood in the hallway with a letter in his hand. "What's this?" she asked. "A deed. I'm signing over half the ranch to you, effective immediately." At her stunned silence, he continued. "If something happens to me, this place becomes yours. You'll have the resources to keep fighting or to sell on your terms. Either way, you'll be secure." Eleanor stared at the paper. "Garrett, this is worth a fortune." "Then consider it your 6-month payment." But his eyes told a different story. "Or consider it what I'd want my wife to have. We're not married." "Not yet." He stepped closer, and Eleanor's breath caught. "But I'm hoping we will be. Not because of the arrangement, not because it's practical, but because—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "Because I'm falling in love with you, Eleanor Morgan. I know I said I didn't have it in me, but you prove me wrong. You prove me wrong every day with your courage, your kindness, your strength. I see you, and I see the rest of my life." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "I've been married twice, Garrett. Both times to men who saw me as property. I swore I'd never give anyone that power over me again. I don't want power over you." Garrett's voice was raw with emotion. "I want to stand beside you. I want to fight with you, laugh with you, build something with you. I want to wake up in 50 years and still feel this." He pressed her hand over his heart. "This thing that happens when you walk into a room." "I'm afraid," Eleanor whispered. "I'm terrified of trusting this, of trusting you." "Then trust us. Trust what we've built these past weeks." He threaded his fingers through hers. "I know the proud ranch owner laughed at the mail-order bride's simplicity when you first arrived. I was a fool. Your letter showed me exactly who you are. Someone who tries even when it's hard. Someone who gets back up. Someone who deserves better than I gave you that first day." "But her letter changed his heart forever," Eleanor said, the tears spilling over. "Is that what you're saying?" "Yeah." Garrett's thumb brushed away her tears. "That's exactly what I'm saying. You changed everything, Eleanor. You changed me." She surged forward, wrapping her arms around his neck. Garrett held her tight, his face buried in her hair. They stood that way for a long moment, holding each other in the quiet darkness. "I love you too," Eleanor finally said against his shoulder. "I didn't think I could, but I do. You make me feel safe. You make me feel seen. You make me feel like you're enough." Garrett pulled back to look at her face. "Yes," she smiled through her tears, "like I'm more than enough." Garrett kissed her then, soft and questioning. Eleanor melted into it, her hands sliding into his hair. The kiss deepened, and she felt the last of her walls crumble. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Marry me," Garrett said. "Not in 6 months. Now. Tomorrow. I want everyone to know you're mine." He caught himself. "No, I want everyone to know I'm yours." "Yes," Eleanor laughed, the sound giddy and free. "Yes, Garrett Sinclair, I'll marry you." They were married 3 days later in the ranch's front room, with the ranch hands as witnesses and Maria crying happy tears. Eleanor wore a dress that had belonged to Garrett's mother, soft buckskin, decorated with intricate beadwork. Garrett wore his best shirt and looked at Eleanor like she'd hung the moon. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Garrett kissed her with enough passion to make the ranch hands cheer. Eleanor blushed but kissed him back, not caring who saw. That night, in the room they would now share, Garrett was impossibly gentle. He kissed every scar, every mark of her past suffering, murmuring promises against her skin. Eleanor cried again, not from pain or fear, but from the overwhelming tenderness of being truly cherished for the first time in her life. "I love you," Garrett said, as they lay tangled together afterward, the moonlight streaming through the window. "I'll love you until I take my last breath." "I'll love you longer than that," Eleanor replied, tracing the scar on his temple. "I'll love you into whatever comes after." The confrontation with Continental came 2 weeks later. Vernon Walsh arrived with 20 armed men, confident that Garrett would either sell or be buried. He found Garrett and Eleanor standing on the porch, surrounded by every rancher in the valley and half the town of Copper Ridge. Word had spread about Continental's tactics, and people were tired of being threatened. "You can't fight progress, Sinclair," Walsh said, but his confidence had wavered. "This isn't progress, it's greed." Garrett's voice carried across the yard. "And you're going to leave, now. Because if you don't, every person here is a witness to your threats, your arson, your assault. The territorial governor is a friend of my late father's. I've already sent him a detailed letter about Continental's activities." Walsh's face darkened. "You're making a mistake." "No." Eleanor stepped forward, her chin high. "You're making one. This is our home, our land, and we're not giving it up to men like you who take and leave nothing behind but poison and ruin." Walsh stared at her, then at the armed crowd behind them. Finally, he turned his horse and rode away, his men following. They never came back. 6 months later, Eleanor stood on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. Her hand rested on her slightly rounded belly. She was 3 months along, and this time, with Maria's help and the doctor from Copper Ridge checking on her weekly, Garrett was cautiously optimistic. Arms wrapped around her from behind, and she leaned back into Garrett's warmth. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Everything. How scared I was that first day. How sure I was that I'd never be happy again." She turned in his arms to face him. "How wrong I was. I was thinking about your letter," Garrett said with a smile, "about how I almost sent you away because of spelling mistakes. The proud ranch owner who laughed at my simplicity." Eleanor teased. "Who was humbled by your strength and changed by your courage." Garrett's hand joined hers on her belly. "Thank you for not giving up. On yourself, on me, on us." "Together," Eleanor said, the word that had become their promise. "Together," Garrett echoed, and kissed her as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting their world in gold. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale from. Are you listening at home, during your commute, or perhaps while working? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of Eleanor and Garrett's journey? Your feedback means the world to us.